All right, let's have a look at one of our big stories of this morning. A new IATA report has confirmed what we probably already knew, that 2020 was the worst year in the history of air travel in terms of people getting on planes. We are joined now by Vinamra Longani, Head of Operations at the law firm Sarin & Co. Vinamra, thanks for joining us.
Good morning, and thank you for having me.
Headline numbers in the report: 2020 now officially a historic low for air travel, a 66% fall in passenger demand. Where were the surprises or not for you in this report?
There were a couple of surprises. I'll be honest with you. These are what I'd call rays of hope throughout the year, which didn't really pan out the way one would have hoped to. One of them, for example, was the UAE-UK air bridge. I mean, as you are aware, this is one of the examples, of how quarantine-free travel resumed between two nations, i.e. the UK and the UAE. It also is an example of how fragile the nature of these corridors is, given that these are constantly reviewed and suspended at short notice due to growing COVID cases.
What did we see in this region, Vinamra?
Well, as far as the airlines in the Middle East are concerned, there was obviously a sizable drop in demand. The report suggests it was about 72.9% below 2019. Annual capacity fell 63.9%, and also load factors plummeted 18.9%. Now, essentially, if you were to look at Dubai, Dubai essentially is a fairly large center for business and tourism on its own. And while a lot of other airlines in the region rely largely on connecting international traffic, Dubai has its own fair share of origin and destination traffic. However, given the size of Emirates, it is a mega connector. I mean, it is the world's largest long-haul airline. So, as soon as borders start closing and unilateral travel restrictions are imposed by nations, any long-haul airline that relies on connecting large volumes of people over its hub suffers.
Where has this then left airlines moving into 2021? Where are we?
Well, like I said, there are rays of hope in the sense that domestic recovery was way quicker than international travel. And this was widely predicted in the beginning of the pandemic too. See, there is pent-up travel for demand and people would like to travel. It's just that nations where either the vaccination drives have picked up considerably, or nations that seem to have got a lid on COVID are where we're seeing a complete recovery of domestic travel. China and Russia, for example. India, even to an extent, capacity in India for domestic travel is back to 70% of pre-COVID levels, and people are traveling on holidays, essentially. The real issue I see with reference to international travel is probably the uneven pace of vaccination drives globally. And that will continue to impact international travel. And also the Middle Eastern airlines will continue to be impacted. Essentially, it is widely suggested that the chain of transmission of COVID-19 may be broken when about 60% of the population of the nation is vaccinated. Now, while some Western countries might achieve this by the end of 2021, even some of the nations in the Middle East, it is predicted Australia, for example, will get there in Q1 2022. Larger countries like India and China, which bring in a lot of feeder traffic for a lot of airlines, will probably reach there at the end of 2022. So, air bubbles would probably be the way forward, or air bridges, if you might call them. And international travel would continue to struggle throughout this year. We might see some sort of a sizable recovery towards the end of 2021.
Vinamra, to be horrendously cold and calculating here, this is not my personal view in the slightest, I'll just caveat wildly, but why or how does that inaccurate vaccination rollout affect airlines? If you look at what the WHO is worried about, they're worried about the world's more developing nations not getting vaccines and the more developed nations having a head start on them. if we're just looking at the balance sheet, you could argue that those in more developed nations are more likely to be flying down the front end of the planes, paying more for tickets anyway. How does that impact the balance sheet?
Yeah, well, the thing is, if once, let's say, for example, a country, a vast majority of one country is vaccinated, you have a bubble there. So, people will travel within that country or between other countries that have reached a similar sort of level of vaccination. But that doesn't bode really well, for example, airlines based in the Gulf, because they essentially are mega connectors. They connect people from west to east and vice versa, for example. So if India, which is a sizably large market for the Gulf Airlines, manages to only vaccinate majority of its people by the end of 2022, countries in the West will impose some sort of restrictions or testing requirements on people arriving from India. So, that basically adds another layer of just procedures apart from visas, etc., that need to be taken care of by people who want to travel. So, and that makes travel complex. So yes, people will travel between nations where a fair amount of vaccinations have been sort of rolled out, but global travel as it was pre-COVID might take a while to come back.
Well, IATA is now predicting about 50% of 2019 passenger demand, and that's the best case scenario. They're predicting down to 40%, depending on what happens with vaccinations and second outbreaks and lockdowns. Are we going to see airlines go bust, Vinamra?
Well, that cannot be ruled out at this point in time. Airlines have had support from governments. In most nations, they've had support from governments to survive. However, we just saw Norwegian pull out of long-haul travel altogether. I mean, one could debate that the low-cost long-haul model was always questionable from the beginning, but it won't be surprising, unfortunately, to see more airlines go down.
And the particular challenges for Emirates and Etihad this year?
Well, like I said, they would just have to continue to focus on things like cargo and also, once the UAE gets most of its vaccinations done, there would be relaxed air bridges or air bubbles between, let's say, countries in the West who might let their people travel. I mean, there would also, like challenges with India. At this point in time, India has restricted Gulf Airlines from carrying any Sixth Freedom traffic over their hubs. So, these airlines survive on Sixth Freedom traffic. So, this is something that we'll just have to wait and watch and see. It's ever evolving, this situation. But yeah, the challenges for airlines largely relying on international air travel will continue.
Vinamra Longani is head of operations at the law firm Sarin & Co, speaking to us out of India this morning about that new IATA report, which has confirmed that 2020 was the worst year for passenger traffic, for passenger demand for the airline industry in history. 66% down for travel demand, 75% for international passenger traffic, just under 50% for domestic demand around the world.